Please rise as you are able. The Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went by way of Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee in the region of Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him aside in private away from the crowd and put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, "be opened." And immediately his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one. But the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise you.
Well, again, happy Rally Day weekend. It's an exciting day for Hope Lutheran Church and for many churches as we all start another year of programming. Welcome back to those who have been away for much of the summer months. It's truly a great day to be the church. And then we hear Jesus calling a woman and her daughter dogs, which for me kind of kills the mood. This gospel reading has always been a tough one for me. So first, let's get a little background to help with the context. Jesus is returning to Galilee by ways of areas that, in the minds of his followers and Mark's hearers, are very foreign, filled with outsiders and those considered unclean, those not considered part of the chosen people. Tyre was a major Gentile urban setting. It was home to Phoenicians who were the mortal enemies of Israel because the elite Phoenicians abused and overbought the food and outranked the Jews in the area. The riches of the Phoenicians were in sharp contrast to the poverty of the Jews. In Mark's time, a war with Tyre had left many Galilean Jews dead or imprisoned, so we might imagine that the Jewish audience of Mark's gospel was primed to hate whatever person of the region crossed paths with Jesus. And as a Syrophoenician, meaning she was a Greek speaker of a different religion, probably an aristocrat, not to mention an unaccompanied woman approaching a strange man, she embodied their disgust. But even with this context, what is with Jesus' response to this mother who comes to him like so many others before her, with faith in Jesus' power to offer healing and restoration and salvation in ways like no other? Are we catching him standing up for his own, showing himself in this story to be a scrappy neighborhood prophet who, when visited by an enemy of his followers, becomes rudely defensive, only to be reminded of the dignity of every life by this woman with great love for her daughter? Does this mean we're seeing Jesus in all his humanness? Is this a learning moment for him too? As fully human, did he need his understanding of God's mission to be radically expanded by the unlikeliest of people? Or is he using this as a teaching moment for others, though there are no others around, according to Mark's telling? Or is Mark setting a trap for us, challenging our ownership of God? Instead of siding with his followers, Jesus in the end agrees with their mortal enemy, the outsider, and concludes that she is just as worthy to receive what Jesus offers. Is it a literary device that sets us up to agree with Jesus and then makes a complete pivot, leaving us reeling as God's mission is expanded? Whether we look at this story as Mark's way of challenging the early followers of Christ to see outsiders as part of Christ's mission, or we see it as a testament to Jesus' humanness, his reflecting the attitudes of his time and learning from this woman and caring mother, it seems the essence of this story is that those who are outsiders, who are others, are welcome. Those who are enemies are worthy of God's love and care, as much as we may like to think otherwise. And this, I believe, is where we are invited into the story to think about and talk about some really tough issues. And one that comes to mind for me especially is prejudice, which I totally get is a super uncomfortable thing to talk about. But it's something we all experience and feel as much as we hate to admit it. And our Christian faith and our scriptures actually have quite a bit to say about it. Prejudice is defined as preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. Jesus and his followers had never met this woman, yet his, and surely their, attitude towards her is less than favorable. Taking one look at her, she is put neatly in her place. We can imagine the reactions of the original audience as fellow human beings who struggle with our own prejudice, who sometimes see people and without having much of anything to base our opinion on, put them in their place. Whether they are those whom we feel don't belong, or we group them in with others who have somehow done us wrong, have caused harm to family, friends, or our nation or the world, perhaps we might start to feel with the original audience the disgust and hatred for all that people like her have done. Anger that she even had the gall to show up at Jesus' feet thinking she and her daughter could be included in Jesus' ministry. Comfort at Jesus' dismissal of her, horror at her response to Jesus of all people. And what do we feel when Jesus sends her home to a daughter that is healed and a life that is restored with the realization that she is, too, part of God's kingdom? At what point can our prejudice against who she is give way to recognition of her individual personhood and God's abundant grace that doesn't decrease for us when others are included? And even awe at her faith that assured her that even just the crumbs from God's table would be enough. There's no denying that this woman is pretty incredible. In the words of one of the commentators I read this week, she is driven by something more powerful than protocol. Most mothers, this world round, can relate to this, I imagine. Doing whatever it takes, risking whatever necessary for the health and wholeness of her child. She breaks laws, written and unwritten, to try to secure a future for her daughter whom she loves. The fact that she wasn't supposed to be there, wasn't supposed to associate with Jesus, would not get in the way of her powerful belief that Jesus could heal her daughter and the powerful desire to have it be so. She doesn't contest Jesus' insulting argument, but simply responds with a rational answer, using Jesus' own words to show that she has faith even in just the crumbs. In some ways, she reminds us of Moses and her dialogue with God that convinces God to do differently than what God had at first intended. Her deep faith was demonstrated by her persistence in speaking up for what she believed to be true of her daughter and true of Jesus. The woman speaks truth to Jesus that he perhaps needed to hear, needed to be reminded of that she and her daughter are part of God's plan. From the beginning, they were created by God and are worthy to be redeemed by God. So what does this have to say to us today? This is a super exciting day at Hope, the beginning of another program year. The buzz and the energy of Rally Day is all around us. And as we continue with our faith formation, might we be reminded that the goal is not perfect attendance or memorizing everything there is to know. The goal is to form disciples who will share the good news of Jesus Christ with those who believe that it is for them, and with those who believe it could never be for them. Because we believe the good news of Jesus Christ, the healing and wholeness that is offered at God's table, is for everyone. So as we celebrate together as Hope Lutheran Church, the scripture is an important reminder that part of our mission as God's church turns us outward to the unlikely neighbor, to our enemies, to those whom we may regard with initial disgust, to recognize that God is for them too. We are called to a larger vision of mission. The next 3 Sundays, we'll be talking about Hope's mission and how we live that mission out. Perhaps this is just the reading to get us thinking about how God's mission expands beyond our comfort zone. Hopefully, all of this isn't entirely new to us, but what I think is so different here is that we see the possibility that Christ is learning too, and how we might do the same. When the woman persists with Jesus, he doesn't shut down, but instead allows her perspective to impact him. In our second reading, James addresses the day-to-day implications of our faith, just as Jesus was met by someone in his day-to-day life who provided a challenge to the conventional popular thought of the day about who God was really for. We too meet such people who challenge us. Just as Jesus' thinking had been shaped by the culture he was raised in, so too has our thinking been shaped by the prevailing thoughts of the day. And sometimes it fits beautifully with the gospel, and sometimes it does not. Whether our prejudice affects the way we look at different religions, different races, different genders, different occupations, different backgrounds, or at people who struggle to hold down a job, people who have been arrested, people who protest or people who don't, people who struggle with mental illness, it happens. We're human. We all make quick judgments, and these affect how we feel about various people and their rights. When we can acknowledge this, then we can be intentional about how we respond, how we work to try to ensure that we recognize our prejudice and move beyond it so we can continue to see all people as deserving of God's love, as worthy of healing and restoration. And harder still, that all people have something to teach us if we're willing to see them and listen as we encounter them in our daily living. Again, it's so hard to say what was going on here for Jesus, and it's easy to dismiss the stories that may challenge our understanding of who Christ is. Yet what I hear in this story is an important reminder that we all need every day, that we're always learning. We can always be taught by some of the most unexpected people if we're willing to move past our prejudice and listen. And as we do this very difficult work of loving our neighbors and our enemies alike, the grace and the forgiveness of God, which is new every day, sustains us. Thanks be to God.